Was it? Was he after you physically?
Yes, but that didn't happen until we were almost finished with Marnie.
She is 96 years old, and she cannot remember a single day of it. The awards are gone, the films are gone, the limousine is gone, and everything that happened inside it. The contract that should have made her the greatest star Alfred Hitchcock ever created. The 5 years he spent making sure she became nothing instead. The sanctuary she built in the California desert while the industry that had tried to destroy her moved on and pretended nothing had happened. All of it dissolved, taken not by arrival, not by time in the ordinary sense, but by dementia, quietly, completely, without drama. And yet, the record she spent 50 years building remains exactly where she left it. Here is what is almost impossible to hold in the mind at once. The woman who named the most celebrated director in the history of cinema, named him clearly, consistently, and without retraction across 5 decades and 431 pages of memoir, can no longer remember that she did it. But the record cannot develop dementia. The interviews cannot forget. The pages cannot go blank. What Tippi Hedren said, she said permanently. And what she said changed the way the world understands what genius is allowed to cost the people standing inside its orbit. What does it mean to spend 50 years building a record that you will one day lose access to, but that the world never can? What is owed to a woman who paid for the truth with the career she was supposed to have, and paid it willingly, and kept paying, long before anyone was ready to listen? Before we can answer that, we have to go back to the beginning, to a cold Lutheran town in Minnesota in 1930, to a face that a camera could not look away from, and to a phone call 31 years later that changed everything, though not in the way that was promised. Natalie K. Hedren was born on the 19th of January, 1930, in New Ulm, Minnesota, a small Lutheran town of Norwegian-American families where the winters were long, the expectations were modest, and the definition of a good life was measured in steadiness, not stardom. Her parents were not poor. They were not broken. They were, by the standards of their time and place, exactly what a mid-century American family was supposed to be: church-going, disciplined, quietly proud. What they did not have was any particular reason to suspect that the girl they were raising in that cold, flat, orderly town would one day be standing in front of Alfred Hitchcock's camera while trained seagulls were thrown at her face by a crew following instructions from the most powerful director in Hollywood. That distance between New Ulm and the Bodega Bay set of The Birds is not just geographical. It is the distance between a life that was supposed to be small and a life that became something else entirely. And it began not with ambition exactly, but with a face. Tippi Hedren had a face that the camera did not know what to do with except love. That is not a metaphor. It is a technical fact about light and bone structure and the way certain features translate, or fail to translate, through a lens. Hers translated perfectly, completely, in a way that was visible from the first photograph ever taken of her and never stopped being visible in the last. At 17, she left Minnesota, not fleeing anything, not running toward a dream in the dramatic sense that biographies tend to require. She simply went to New York, the way young women with faces like hers and ambitions that outgrew their hometowns sometimes did in the late 1940s. And she became a model. Not immediately, not easily. The early years in New York were the years that never make it into the retrospectives. The years of small apartments and composite cards and casting calls where nothing happened and the rent still needed paying. She worked. She built. She did what models of her era did. She made herself available to the camera over and over, until the camera started to agree with what she already knew about herself. And then, it did. Completely. Her face appeared on the cover of Life magazine, on the cover of Glamour, in the kind of editorial pages that in 1958 and 1959 represented the absolute summit of what American commercial photography could offer a woman. She was not famous. She was not a star. But she was known in the specific, lucrative, industry-facing way that a model is known, as someone whose image sold things, whose face communicated aspiration and elegance and the particular kind of composed American beauty that advertisers in that era were willing to pay serious money to put in front of the public. She was working. She was building something. She was, by any reasonable measure, a success. And then she appeared in a television commercial for Diet Dr. Pepper. She was 31 years old. The commercial was not remarkable. The product was not remarkable. The performance, a woman moving through a scene with the ease and precision of someone who had spent a decade learning exactly how to exist inside a frame, was, to the casual viewer, entirely unremarkable. Alfred Hitchcock did not find it unremarkable. He saw her. He stopped. He called. And the life that Tippi Hedren had built, slowly, carefully, on her own terms, through a decade of work that nobody handed her, was about to change into something that would take another 50 years to fully understand. The call came through her agent. Alfred Hitchcock had seen her in the Diet Dr. Pepper commercial and wanted to meet her. Not audition her. Meet her. There is a distinction. And in 1961, Hollywood, with Alfred Hitchcock making it, that distinction meant everything. This was not a director looking for someone who could act. This was the most famous filmmaker in the world. The man who had made Rear Window and Vertigo and Psycho, the man whose silhouette was a cultural symbol, whose name above the title of any film was a guarantee of both quality and audience. This was that man, saying he had seen something in a face on a television screen and wanted to know more about it. Tippi Hedren went to the meeting. What Hitchcock saw when she walked in was not simply a beautiful woman. Hollywood in 1961 had no shortage of beautiful women. What he saw was a specific kind of composure, a coolness, a self-possession, a quality of withholding that the camera reads as mystery and audiences read as depth. He had built his career on women with that quality. Grace Kelly had it. Kim Novak had it. Ingrid Bergman had it. And now, sitting across from him in a room that represented more power than anything Tippi Hedren had ever been close to in her professional life, she had it. He offered her a contract. 7 years. Exclusive. He would develop her. He would train her. Diction lessons, acting coaches, every resource the studio system could provide. He would make her a star. Not the slow, uncertain kind of star that a model might become after years of small roles and patient climbing, but the sudden, complete Hitchcock kind of star that arrived fully formed in a film the entire world would see. She signed. She had no reason not to. She was 31 years old, which, in the entertainment industry of that era, was already closer to late than early for a woman trying to break into film. She had a career, a good one, but it was a model's career, built on image rather than performance, on stillness rather than story. Hitchcock was offering her the thing that modeling could never give her, a role, a real one, in a film that would define careers and shape legacies and be discussed for generations. The training began immediately. diction coaches to smooth whatever remained of the Minnesota in her vowels, acting lessons structured around the specific demands of camera performance rather than stage projection. Wardrobe consultations. Hitchcock was precise about clothes in a way that went beyond professional interest, choosing the tailored suits and the clean, elegant lines that would become as much a part of his visual language as the camera angles themselves. He was building something. He was building a Hitchcock blonde, that specific, recurring, ice-cool feminine archetype that appeared in film after film, and that he alone seemed to know how to unlock on screen. He told her what he was constructing. He showed her the blueprint. He said, with the authority of a man who had never been wrong about these things, "You will be a star." And in 1963, with the release of The Birds, he was right. The film was unlike anything audiences had seen. The premise, ordinary coastal California life invaded and destroyed by coordinated attacks from flocks of birds, sounds, described plainly, almost absurd. On screen, directed by Hitchcock with the technical precision that defined his entire career, it was genuinely terrifying. And at the center of it, playing Melanie Daniels with exactly the composure and the mystery and the controlled elegance that Hitchcock had identified in a diet doctor. Pepper commercial 2 years earlier was Tippi Hedren. The reviews were not unanimous. They rarely are for something genuinely new. But the reaction to Hedren specifically was clear, consistent, and unambiguous. She was extraordinary. The Golden Globe Committee agreed. She was nominated for Most Promising Newcomer. She won. She was 33 years old. She had just made one of the most discussed films of the decade with the most celebrated director in the world. She had a 7-year exclusive contract that guaranteed her continued access to that world. She had, by every visible measure, arrived. What she did not know, what she could not have known, because nothing in her decade of modeling work or her careful, patient professional building had prepared her to recognize it, was that something had already shifted in the man who controlled her contract, her access, and her future. It had shifted during the filming of The Birds, during the long days on location in Bodega Bay, during the hours in the car between the set and wherever they were staying, during the ordinary, unavoidable proximity that film productions create between directors and their leading actors. Hitchcock had begun to see her differently, not as an actress, not as a professional collaboration, not as the next chapter in a career built on transforming women into icons on screen. He had begun to see her as something he wanted, something he intended to have. And the difference between Alfred Hitchcock wanting something and not getting it, as Tippi Hedren was about to discover, was the difference between a career and the ruins of one. The filming of The Birds was, by any technical measure, one of the most physically demanding productions in Hollywood history up to that point. The premise required real birds, not suggested birds, not edited birds, not the kind of birds that a careful cinematographer could imply with shadow and sound and strategic cutting. Hitchcock wanted birds on screen, in frame, in contact with his actress, in quantities that would make the audience understand viscerally and immediately that what was happening to Melanie Daniels was not metaphor, but annihilation. What that meant in practice, for Tippi Hedren, was this. For the attic sequence, the film's climax, the scene in which Melanie is trapped in a confined space while birds attack her from every direction, the original plan called for mechanical birds. Fake ones, the kind that could be controlled, positioned, made safe for the actress inside the frame. 1 week before the sequence was scheduled to shoot, the mechanical birds were deemed inadequate. They did not move correctly. They did not look real. They did not produce the effect that Hitchcock required. He replaced them with live birds. For 5 days, 5 full working days on a closed set, trained handlers threw live seagulls, ravens, and pigeons at Tippi Hedren, while she performed the scene. The birds were attached to her costume with light elastic ties to prevent them from simply flying away. They were thrown at her face, at her hands, at her body, in continuous rotation for the duration of each take. She had light protective coverings over her eyes. She had nothing else. On the 4th day, a bird landed on her face and scratched the skin directly below her eye. She was, by her own account, within a fraction of an inch of losing the eye entirely. She sat down on the set and did not get up for a week, not from protest, not from artistic disagreement, from complete physical and psychological exhaustion, the kind that does not respond to rest because it is not tiredness, but the aftermath of sustained, unrelenting assault on a human body that has simply reached its limit. The doctor who examined her used the word exhaustion. He recommended she be given a week off from filming. Hitchcock complied. The production paused, and when it resumed, Tippi Hedren returned to the set and completed the film. This is the part of the story that matters most, and that is most easily missed in the larger narrative. She went back. She finished it. She delivered the performance that earned her a Golden Globe nomination and established her as a genuine screen presence of the first order. Whatever was happening, whatever had begun to shift in Hitchcock's behavior, whatever she had already noticed in the car, in the private moments, in the accumulated texture of daily proximity to a man who was beginning to behave in ways that had nothing to do with filmmaking. She absorbed it, contained it, and kept working. Because she was a professional. Because the film mattered. Because she had no framework yet for understanding what was being done to her, or any language for describing it that the world of 1962 would have recognized as legitimate. And then there was the limousine. In her memoir, published in 2016, Hedren describes a moment during the production of The Birds. Riding in Hitchcock's car, a routine transit between locations, the kind of movement between places that happens dozens of times on any film production without incident or significance. Except that on this occasion, Hitchcock, with no warning, threw himself on top of her and tried to kiss her. She pushed him off. She got out of the car. She did not report it. There was no mechanism for reporting it that would not have destroyed her career on the spot. There was no human resources department, no industry protocol, no established language for what had just happened to her that would have been received as anything other than a young actress making a dangerous accusation against the most powerful director in Hollywood. So she said nothing. She went back to work, and the film was completed. She would not say anything publicly for decades. The second film was Marnie. 1964. Hedren plays a compulsive thief with a traumatic past, a more psychologically complex role than The Birds had required, and one that Hitchcock approached with the same meticulous control that defined all his work. On paper, it was a continuation of the collaboration that had produced The Birds. The same director, the same actress, the same studio infrastructure, the same promise of a career being carefully built by the most skilled architect in the business. Off-camera, something had changed completely. Hitchcock's behavior, the unsolicited advances, the inappropriate comments, the pressure that had been building since the production of The Birds, had escalated. During the filming of Marnie, Hedren wrote, Hitchcock suddenly grabbed her and put his hands on her. She told him the behavior was unacceptable. She said it clearly. She said it directly. She said it the way a woman who has spent a decade building a professional career through discipline and self-possession says something she means absolutely. What you are doing is unacceptable, and it must stop. Alfred Hitchcock's response was not apology. It was not withdrawal. It was not the behavior of a man confronted with his own conduct and choosing to correct it. His response was a threat. He told her he was going to ruin her career. And then, with the patience and the thoroughness and the complete lack of sentiment that characterized everything he did professionally, he set about doing exactly that. He kept her under contract. The 7-year agreement she had signed in the optimism of 1961, with its promise of stardom and its guarantee of continued access to the highest level of Hollywood filmmaking, became the instrument of her imprisonment. She could not work for other directors. She could not take other roles. She could not accept the opportunities that began to arrive. Because at the level of visibility that the birds had given her, opportunities did arrive. Federico Fellini, the great Italian director, wanted her for one of his films. Hitchcock blocked it. Other directors expressed interest. Hitchcock blocked those too, systematically, methodically, without exception. 5 years. 5 years of her career. The years between 34 and 39, which for a woman in the Hollywood of that era were not peripheral years, but the years when a career either consolidated into something lasting or began the long, slow process of being forgotten, were spent under contract to a man who had decided that if he could not have what he wanted from her, she would have nothing at all. She described it in one of the interviews she gave over the 50 years she kept giving them, with a plainness that is more devastating than any dramatic framing could have been. He said he would ruin her career. And he did. He kept her under contract and would not let her work. It was, she said, just one of those Hollywood nightmares. Unnecessary. Sad. Just sad. And then she said, "But anyway, life goes on." The contract ended. Hitchcock did not renew it. Whether that decision came from a calculation about her commercial value, from some residual professional instinct that told him the arrangement had served its purpose, or simply from the passage of time wearing down even his capacity for sustained vindictiveness, she never said, and he never explained. What mattered was that the door opened, and Tippi Hedren walked through it. What was waiting on the other side was not the career that the birds had promised. It could not have been. 5 years of deliberate professional obstruction. 5 years during which every director who wanted her was turned away. Every role that might have consolidated her into a permanent fixture of American cinema was blocked before it could be offered. Do not simply evaporate when the contract expires. The industry had moved. The moment had moved. The particular alignment of visibility and momentum and industry enthusiasm that surrounds a performer in the immediate aftermath of a breakout role is not a renewable resource. It exists once, briefly, and then it is gone. Hitchcock had known that. That was precisely the point. So the career that Tippi Hedren built after 1966 was not the career of the woman who had won the Golden Globe and stood at the center of one of the most discussed films of the decade. It was a different career, smaller in its industry profile, more modest in its commercial reach, built film by film and role by role, without the infrastructure of a major studio and the backing of the most powerful director in Hollywood. She worked. She kept working. She took the roles that came and made them count, and never stopped being, on screen, the composed and precise and luminous presence that Hitchcock had identified in a television commercial and then spent 5 years trying to destroy. It was not the career she was owed, but it was hers. And in the spaces between the films, she built something else entirely. Something that had nothing to do with Hollywood, and everything to do with the particular quality of stubbornness and commitment that had allowed her to survive 5 years of deliberate professional destruction without becoming someone smaller than she had been before. In 1970, Tippi Hedren founded the Shambala Preserve. The preserve began not as an institution but as a consequence, the kind of thing that happens when a person with a specific kind of character encounters a specific kind of need and simply responds to it without a strategic plan and without a guarantee of outcome. Hedren and her second husband, Noel Marshall, had begun working with big cats, lions, tigers, leopards, cougars, in the context of a film project that would eventually become Roar. In the process of that work, they encountered animals that had nowhere to go. Big cats that had been kept as exotic pets, confiscated from illegal operations, rescued from situations of neglect and danger, with no facility equipped to receive them and no legal framework adequate to protect them. Hedren created the framework. She created the facility. On land in Acton, California, she established a sanctuary that would eventually become the Shambala Preserve, formerly the Shambala Preserve for Large Cats, now known as the Tippi Hedren Shambala Preserve, housing lions, tigers, leopards, and other large felines in open, natural habitat, with full-time professional care for the remainder of their natural lives. It is, by any measure, one of the most significant private wildlife conservation operations in American history. It exists because a woman who had been told that her only value was her face, and her compliance decided in her 40s that she was interested in something more permanent than either. The film that emerged from that period, Roar, released in 1981, deserves its own accounting because there is nothing in the history of American cinema quite like it, and probably never will be again. The production took 11 years. It was filmed on the Shambala property with approximately 150 untrained lions, tigers, cheetahs, cougars, and other large cats moving freely through every scene, in direct physical contact with the human cast and crew, without cages, without significant barriers, without the level of safety infrastructure that any modern production would consider the absolute minimum acceptable condition for filming in the presence of apex predators. 70 members of the cast and crew were injured during production. Noel Marshall was hospitalized multiple times. Melanie Griffith, Hedren's daughter, who appeared in the film as a teenager, was attacked by a lion and required facial reconstructive surgery. Jan de Bont, the cinematographer who would later direct Speed and Twister, was scalped by a lion and required 200 stitches to close the wound. Tippi Hedren herself was attacked by a lion during filming. She sustained injuries that required medical attention. She returned to the set. Roar was eventually released to minimal commercial success and significant critical bewilderment. Audiences and reviewers in 1981 did not have an adequate category for what they were watching, which was simultaneously a narrative film, a wildlife documentary, a safety catastrophe, and one of the most genuinely dangerous artistic undertakings ever committed to celluloid. It has since been reassessed. The Drafthouse Films re-release of 2015 introduced it to a new generation of viewers with the marketing tagline, "No animals were harmed in the making of this film. 150 people were." The tagline is almost accurate. The spirit of it is completely accurate. And through all of it, through the 11 years of filming in proximity to animals that could and did cause serious physical harm, through the injuries and the hospitalizations and the moments on set that any reasonable risk assessment would have classified as potentially fatal, Tippi Hedren kept going. Not because she was reckless, not because she was indifferent to danger, but because she had already survived something that the industry considered unsurvivable, the deliberate destruction of a career by the most powerful man in it, and had discovered, on the other side of that survival, that she was more interested in what she could build than in what had been taken from her. Her personal life across this period was its own parallel story of building and loss and continuity. She had been married first to Peter Griffith from 1952 to 1960, a marriage that produced her daughter Melanie, and ended before Hitchcock entered her professional life. She married Noel Marshall in 1964, the year of Marnie, the year of the confrontation and the threat. A marriage that lasted through the Roar years and the founding of Shambala, and ended in 1982. She married Luis Barrenechea in 1985, and that marriage ended in 1992. 3 marriages, 1 daughter. And that daughter, Melanie Griffith, became, in the 1980s, one of the most celebrated actresses in American film. Working Girl in 1988. Something Wild in 1986. A Golden Globe win. An Academy Award nomination. The trajectory that Tippi Hedren had been denied. The consolidation of early promise into sustained industry-defining stardom. Her daughter achieved it. And Melanie Griffith's daughter, Tippi Hedren's granddaughter, is Dakota Johnson, born in 1989. Known globally for the 50 Shades of Grey franchise, for her work in Suspiria and The Lost Daughter and Daddy-O, for a career built on the kind of careful, deliberate role selection that speaks to a performer who understands exactly what she is doing and why. 3 generations, 3 women in the same industry. The grandmother who was the first, who paid the highest price, who built the sanctuary and wrote the memoir and said the name of the man who had done it to her, and whose granddaughter now carries a version of that face, that composure, that quality of self-possession in front of a camera, into a world that has, because of what the grandmother said, slightly better tools for protecting the women inside it. That is not a small legacy. That is not a consolation prize. That is what survival, compounded across generations, actually looks like. She did not wait for permission to speak. That is the first thing to understand about the 50 years of testimony that Tippi Hedren gave about Alfred Hitchcock. She did not wait for a cultural moment, or a movement, or a critical mass of other women saying the same things, or a shift in the industry's willingness to hear what she was describing. She started saying it in the 1970s, when Alfred Hitchcock was still alive, still working, still presiding over his reputation as the master of suspense, with the full authority of a career that had produced some of the most celebrated films in the history of the medium. She said it then. She kept saying it. For 50 years she kept saying it. In interviews, in public appearances, in the careful and deliberate and entirely consistent account she gave every time a journalist or a documentary filmmaker or a biographer asked her what had happened on the set of The Birds and Marnie, and inside the limousine, and in the accumulated daily proximity of a working relationship that had become something else entirely without her consent. The consistency is what matters most, not the drama of a single revelation, not the memoir alone, or the interview alone, or the documentary alone, but the fact that over 5 decades, across hundreds of conversations with hundreds of different people, in hundreds of different contexts, the account never changed. The details remained the same. The language remained the same. The specificity remained the same. The car, the films, the contract, the threat, the 5 years, the blocked opportunities, the name, Alfred Hitchcock. Every time. The same name, the same account. 50 years of it. He died in April of 1980 in Bel Air, California, at the age of 80. He died as he had lived, celebrated, powerful, surrounded by the evidence of a career that had permanently altered the language of cinema. The obituaries were enormous. The tributes were immediate and sincere. The critical establishment, which had spent the better part of 3 decades debating the precise nature of his genius, arrived at a consensus in the days following his death that was essentially unanimous. He was one of the greatest directors who had ever lived. Full stop. No qualification required. Tippi Hedren did not stop talking. The death of Alfred Hitchcock did not change the account she gave. It did not soften the language. It did not introduce the kind of retrospective generosity that public figures sometimes extend toward the dead as a form of professional self-protection or social grace. She said, after he was gone, exactly what she had said while he was alive: that he had assaulted her, that he had threatened her, that he had deliberately destroyed her career as an act of personal revenge for her refusal to comply with what he wanted from her. The response from the people responsible for Hitchcock's legacy was, for most of those 50 years, essentially silence. His family did not issue detailed rebuttals. His estate did not produce documentary evidence contradicting her account. The colleagues and collaborators who had worked closely with him during the periods she described did not come forward in significant numbers to say that what she was describing was impossible or inconsistent with the man they had known. The silence was not proof of anything. Absence of rebuttal is not confirmation. But it was notable, sustained, and complete, across 5 decades of consistent, detailed, specific allegations from a woman who had nothing obvious to gain from making them. Because that is the other thing that must be said plainly. What did Tippi Hedren gain from telling this story? She did not gain industry rehabilitation. The career that Hitchcock had interrupted was not restored by the telling. She did not gain financial compensation. There were no lawsuits, no settlements, no legal proceedings that produced material remedy for what she described. She did not gain uncomplicated admiration. For decades, the more common response to her account was skepticism, deflection, the kind of polite professional discomfort that surrounds any woman who says, about a man the world has decided is a genius, that the genius did something unforgivable to her. What she gained was the record, the permanent, irreversible, documented record of what she said, in her own words, about what had been done to her. And she seems, across 50 years of interviews, to have understood that the record was what mattered, not the immediate reception of it, not the industry's willingness to act on it, not the cultural validation that would only arrive, partially and imperfectly, decades after she first started speaking. The memoir came in 2016, published under the single-word title Tippi. Her name alone on the cover, which is itself a statement about what the book was and was not. It was not a Hollywood memoir in the conventional sense, not a celebration of the golden years, not a nostalgic tour through the glamour of a career spent in close proximity to icons and legends and the machinery of American entertainment. It was a reckoning. 431 pages of it. Specific, detailed, chronological, and written with the clarity of a woman who had been carrying a precise account in her memory for 55 years and had decided, at 86 years old, that the time for any remaining ambiguity had passed. The Hitchcock sections of the memoir produced a reaction that was, by 2016 standards, significant. The cultural moment had shifted enough, not completely, not permanently, but enough, that a detailed account of sustained harassment and deliberate career destruction by a powerful man was received, in many quarters, as something other than professional complaint or personal grievance. It was received as testimony, as evidence, as the kind of document that changes the way a historical figure is understood, not erasing the films, not dismantling the legacy, but adding to the record a dimension that the official biography had omitted, and that the critical establishment had, for decades, preferred not to examine too closely. Donald Spoto's biography of Hitchcock, published in 1983, had already raised serious questions about his behavior toward the women in his films, toward Tippi Hedren specifically, and toward others. The scholarly literature on Hitchcock had been quietly, carefully, academically uncomfortable with certain aspects of his working methods for years before the memoir arrived. But there is a difference between scholarly discomfort and a direct, first-person, named account from the woman who was there. The memoir provided the latter, unmistakably, without qualification. The estate of Alfred Hitchcock did not issue a detailed public rebuttal. 2017 brought the broader cultural reckoning that Hedren had been anticipating, in some sense, for 50 years. The public naming of powerful men in entertainment who had used their position to harm the women working beneath them, and the sudden, collective recognition that what had been described as isolated incidents or personal conflicts, or the inevitable friction of powerful personalities in close proximity, were in fact a systemic pattern with a name and a history and a very long list of women who had been living inside it. Tippi Hedren was not surprised. She had been describing the pattern, her specific experience of it, with her specific perpetrator named, since the 1970s. She watched the reckoning arrive and said, in the interviews she gave during that period, something that was characteristically plain and characteristically devastating. She had been saying this for a very long time. The world was now listening. She was glad. It should have listened earlier. She was 87 years old when she said it. She had been saying it for nearly half a century, and the record, the interviews, the memoir, the decades of consistent, detailed, specific testimony was exactly what she had always said it was: permanent, irreversible, still there. In 2024, a journalist made a routine inquiry. A Spanish reporter preparing a piece that required the perspective of someone who had been there, who had stood inside the machinery of Hollywood at its most powerful and its most predatory, and had survived it and documented it and kept talking about it for 50 years, contacted the representatives of Tippi Hedren to request an interview. The response that came back was not a scheduling conflict. It was not a polite decline citing age or health or a preference for privacy. It was a sentence, a single, plain, clinical sentence that contained, in its complete absence of drama, more weight than any dramatic statement could have carried. She has dementia and is unable to remember her career at all. That is what the world learned in 2024 about the woman who had spent 5 decades ensuring that the world would not forget what had happened to her. The woman who had named the name in the 1970s, when naming it cost something. The woman who had written 431 pages of precise, specific, unflinching memoir. The woman who had given the same account, in the same detail, to hundreds of journalists over 50 years, without the account ever changing or softening or acquiring the kind of retrospective ambiguity that time and social pressure tend to introduce into difficult truths. She can no longer remember any of it. Not the birds, not Marnie, not the limousine, not the contract, not the 5 years, not the blocked opportunities, not Federico Fellini, who wanted her and was refused on her behalf by the man holding her contract, not the Golden Globe, not Shambala, not Roar, not the lion that attacked her on set, and the 200 stitches that closed the wound on the man standing next to her, not the memoir, not the 50 years of interviews, not the name she said every time, without exception, for half a century. The dementia has taken all of it from her, not from the record. In January of 2026, on the 19th of that month, which was the 96th anniversary of her birth in New Ulm, Minnesota, in the cold Lutheran town where nothing about her subsequent life could have been predicted, Tippi Hedren was photographed at the home of her daughter, Melanie Griffith, in Los Angeles. She was, by the account of the people closest to her, content, present in the way that dementia sometimes allows, not in memory, not in the retrieval of the past, but in the immediate, sensory, moment-by-moment experience of being alive and surrounded by people who love her. Melanie Griffith described her mother as happy, healthy, and feisty. There is something in that word, feisty, that feels exactly right. Not as consolation, not as the kind of softening language that families use to make difficult situations more bearable in public, but as a genuine descriptor of a quality that appears to have survived everything else. The contract, the obstruction, the assault, the 5 years, the decades of being told implicitly and explicitly that what she was describing was not important enough to change anything. The dementia itself. The feistiness survived. The essential quality of the woman who pushed Alfred Hitchcock off her in a limousine and then went back to set and finished the film and then spent 50 years making sure the world knew what had happened. That quality, whatever its name, appears to still be present. She is 96 years old. She is the oldest surviving actress to have been directed by Alfred Hitchcock. She is the only one who told this specific story, in this specific detail, for this specific length of time, about this specific man. And here is what the dementia cannot touch. The record is complete. Everything she needed to say, she said. Every interview she needed to give, she gave. Every page of the memoir she needed to write, she wrote. The account exists, in print, in film, in the permanent digital archive of everything that is recorded and preserved and cannot be recalled or retracted or revised. It is there, all of it, exactly as she left it. This is not a small thing. This is, in fact, everything. Because the history of powerful men doing harm to women who work beneath them is also, in significant part, a history of those women not being believed, or being believed too late, or having their accounts softened over time by the pressure of institutional reputation and critical legacy, and the human tendency to prefer a simpler story about genius than the complicated one that includes what the genius did when no one was watching. The history of that erasure is long and well documented and ongoing. Tippi Hedren did not allow it to happen to her story. Not while she could prevent it. She told it so many times, in so many places, with so much specificity and consistency, that the erasure became structurally impossible. The record is too extensive. The account is too detailed. The testimony is too thoroughly documented across too many decades and too many independent sources to be quietly absorbed into the official biography of Alfred Hitchcock without leaving a mark. She knew what she was doing. Across 50 years of interviews, the sense that she understood exactly what she was building, not just a complaint, not just a personal account, but a permanent counter-record to the authorized version of a powerful man's legacy, is unmistakable. She was not naive about the reception. She was not naive about the industry's preference for the version of the story that did not require it to examine its own behavior. She told it anyway. Every time. The same account. The same name. And now, at 96, in the house of her daughter in Los Angeles, she is past the telling. The work of the telling is done. What remains is the record she made, the one that cannot be taken from her by dementia, or by time, or by the ongoing human impulse to simplify the legacies of the powerful into something more comfortable than the truth. She spent 50 years telling the world what Alfred Hitchcock did to her. She paid for it with the career she was supposed to have. She built, in the space left by that loss, a wildlife sanctuary, and a documentary record, and a daughter and a granddaughter who carry something of her forward into a world that is, because of what she said, incrementally less willing to allow the same thing to happen in silence. That is what Tippi Hedren gave the world. It is still there. It cannot be taken back. If the story of a woman who told the truth for 50 years at the cost of everything she was supposed to have has meant something to you, leave a tribute for Tippi Hedren in the comments below. And if you believe that the record matters, that what is said and documented and preserved is more powerful than what is silenced, subscribe to Golden Fame News, because every story we tell here is a story that deserves to be remembered. What does it mean that the woman who made the record can no longer access it, but the record itself remains? And what do we owe to the people who built it at that cost before anyone was ready to listen?